So let me talk about the topic for today. But before I do that, I just want to quickly share that I got a 21:13 on my 5K PB today, despite the weather conditions, which was 30 degrees, humid and hot. And it was noon as well. So I'm very happy about that. It's a 4-minute PB from my last one a couple years ago. So yeah, train hard, be consistent, and you can do it too. It's not as difficult as people make it out to be, but you do have to be consistent. Anyway, let's get to the topic of today's video. So, question from Hollers. Again, thank you for this question because this is really helping me talk about topics that I'm sure a lot of other people want to know more about. So, question is, in relation to working out in the gym, what does doing a set to failure actually mean? So should I be leaving the gym exhausted? And that's a brilliant question. There's a lot to talk about here, so I'll try not to drag it out too long. But why do we need to train to failure, right? A lot of people say, oh, well, you need to make sure you train to failure, otherwise you're not doing anything, you're not progressing. But you realize that a lot of people don't actually explain why. And there's a lot of gym bros, usually gym bros, that mansplain, think they know everything. And honestly, even some guys who have an amazing physique, they probably can't explain it very well. And that's by no means me saying, oh, okay, therefore I explain it very well, but I'd like to think I would try and use sports science and physiology, biomechanics. I'm not very strong in biomechanics, but you got to use sports science to explain things. Otherwise, people are a lot smarter these days. You know, you can't get away with the bro science stuff that a lot of people spew and still spew to this day. So, why do you have to train to failure? Or should you even train to failure? Long story short, if your goal is to build muscle, yeah, I am. Hi. Hello. You want this camera too? I just bought it. It's the DJI Action 6, I think. Why do you want it? This one, I think it was 4,000. Okay, that was really cute. But back to my point. So what was I talking about? Why we need to train to failure. So if your goal is to build muscle and you want to maximize the amount of muscle you build, or in sports science terms, hypertrophy, right? You've got to train pretty much as close to failure as possible without accumulating too much fatigue. And that can be, a very long story, but essentially what you need to remember is the closer you get to failure, the more muscle you will build. Assuming you also do all the other things like eating enough protein, fueling your workouts with enough carbs, sleeping enough, etc. Now, here's the thing. There's something called a stimulus to fatigue ratio, right? And the idea of building as much muscle as possible that your genetic frame will allow you to do is to maximize this SFR. Now, a lot of people will, from my experience, I definitely stimulated my muscles enough back in the day when I was training really hard, and the goal was just to maximize the most amount of muscle I can build. Training 6 days a week, doing a lot of volume, high intensity, pretty much each set goes to failure or close to it. It wouldn't be shy of 1 rep. Every rep would look something along the lines of like this slow. So the rep speed would really drastically slow down, and that's how you recruit all the slow and fast twitch muscle fibers, and that will allow you to grow. The problem is I could not recover from it. And that's something I wish I learned back in the day, but unfortunately, all we were told back then was no pain, no gain, train as hard as you can and whatnot. And it's by a lot of these fitness folks who are on steroids. And the thing with being on steroids is you can train really hard and you can recover very quickly. And that's why it's a very popular drug. Unfortunately, when you're natural, oftentimes when we stimulate that hard and annihilate it, we can't recover in time. And thinking back now, maybe I could have done I definitely could have done a lot better in terms of recovery, like sleeping before 11 p.m., making sure I sleep before 11 p.m., getting up at the same time, sleeping and waking up at the same time every day. Eating better, I wasn't eating exactly the world's best. I definitely could have maximized and improved my nutrition a lot better. Things like these. But even then, I think based on how hard I trained, I don't think I would have still been able to recover with good nutrition and sleep. And yeah, that's why I contemplated doing steroids when I was 17. and I decided that it wasn't worth it. It wasn't something I wanted to do. And honestly, in hindsight, I'm very glad I made that decision. There are definitely a lot of health problems that come with doing steroids, so I would not recommend that route unless if you are planning to become an elite athlete or an elite bodybuilder whatsoever, because unfortunately you will need to use PEDs to get to the highest levels. But that's not really the point. So, do we need to train close to failure? Yes. Do we need to train to absolute failure? In my opinion, for most people, the answer is no. There's studies to show that if you're 1 or 2 reps shy of complete failure in a set, you're gonna build close to the same amount of muscle, if not the same, but you also accumulate a lot less fatigue. So that's why I think it's much better, bang for your buck wise, to not go to absolute failure. But here's the thing, from my observation, as well as, you know, having been someone who's worked out for many years, I think since 2012, so 14 years, and been a trainer for 6, close to 7 now. 95% of people in the gym do not train to failure or even anywhere close to it. And that's why most people will not make the amount of gains that they want or aspire to, because they're not training close to failure. Unfortunately, there's no other way other than to train more intense and to train with more volume to allow you to grow. And that's what separates people who end up with a good physique compared to those who don't. And this is with people who are even consistent. And that's where you need to take it to another level as well. So even if you're consistent, yeah, sure, you'll make gains. But if you want to really maximize the amount of gains to look much higher than, or much more above average, you're going to have to train close to failure, if not to failure. Now, there are exceptions. And if you're someone who wants to build strength and your goal is to simply maximize the amount of weight you lift, then you don't really want to get close to failure. That's more for muscular hypertrophy. But strength goals are actually a completely different story. And I'm actually not that familiar with powerlifting programming, but if you actually look at powerlifters and Olympic lifters, they don't really train close to failure because the fatigue is incredibly high. The weights they're lifting are also incredibly high. It has a lot of impact on the joints, but on top of that, when you train close to failure, you're actually, as you understand now, well, sorry, I haven't really explained it here, but there's 3 mechanisms to hypertrophy, which is a bit confusing, but there's mechanical tension, metabolic stress, and muscle damage. I'm not gonna go super far into it, but when you stimulate these 3 things, these mechanisms for hypertrophy, it actually causes more fatigue. And that's not what you want when you're building strength. The goal is to stimulate, but not create much fatigue, if any at all. Now, okay, sorry, I apologize. You do want to create fatigue, but only very slowly. And I'm not super familiar with strength programming. I know the absolute fundamentals and basics and how to improve with beginners. But once you get to intermediate/advanced, you start to have to go into a very complicated periodization program, forms of periodizing, which just simply means how do we schedule our workouts so that we make sure some days are very intense, some days are less intense but higher in volume. And it's actually very similar to endurance training programs. So people who cycle or people who run marathons, the programming principles are actually quite similar in that sense. So if your goal is to build strength and to lift the absolute most amount of weight you can for 1 rep, you actually don't want to be close to failure. You probably want to be sitting at an RPE 6 or 7, which just means 3 to 4 reps shy of failure, and resting very long periods, which is again totally different to building muscle. So that's why it's really important to make sure you determine what exactly is your goal in the gym. Is your goal to maximize the amount of muscle you build? Is your goal to maximize the amount of strength you build? And those are that's the 2 main things most people go into the gym for. That's what I've noticed. But here's the third one, weight loss. A lot of people actually go into the gym to try and lose weight, and their goal is to lose weight. And that's something we need to talk about, and why it's also important to understand whether or not you should train to failure or not if your goal is simply to lose weight. The answer is, well, it highly depends on your physique, your gender, your age, your current weight, etc. In my opinion, for people who are just trying to lose weight, the most important thing by far is your diet. You can actually get away with not training at all, not doing any cardio, not doing any weight training, and still lose weight. Obviously, that's not the healthiest option, and if anything, it's really not healthy, but it works. So long as you're in a calorie deficit, you will lose weight. That is the simple law of thermodynamics, and we can't dispute that. However, we can manipulate the equation to make sure that we are in a deficit regardless, because you can only lose weight when you're in a deficit. So you either burn a lot of calories, but also eat a lot of calories, but still stay in a deficit, you'll lose weight. You can also burn very little calories, but eat very little calories and still lose weight. Now we all know what's the healthier option, but it works regardless. So technically speaking, you don't have to train close to failure at all if your goal is just to lose weight. And most people, I would actually refrain from training close to failure if your goal is to lose weight, because to maintain muscle mass, and when you're cutting weight, it's pretty much not impossible, unless if you're a complete beginner, to build more muscle. If you're cutting, you're not gonna build muscle. So the goal is just to maintain as much muscle as possible whilst losing fat. And the amount of volume and intensity required in order to maintain muscle is actually significantly lower than what one would expect. So if, let's say, for a given individual like me, if I need to do, let's say, 15 hard working sets per week for chest in order to build chest muscles or more chest muscles, I probably only need a third of that in order to maintain whatever I've built. So I can get away with only doing 5 working sets a week, and I'll still maintain my chest muscles. That's why you'll see a lot of people who built a lot of muscle in their their 20s, early 20s, maintain muscle really easily despite being 40. That's why. And that's why I always tell people, the earlier you can train, the better. It's easier to grow muscle, you have less stress in your life, generally the idea. So you get my point. If your goal is to lose weight, I would pretty much stay clear from failure as much as possible. Try and do more exercise over time and also increase cardio. For someone who's losing weight, I would actually put them on a program that only requires them to maybe do 2 or 3 days a week, ideally 3 days a week of full body workouts for weights, and just focus on doing as much cardio as possible within your realm. And at the end of the day, it is that much easier to lose weight when you're doing more cardio, assuming that you're not getting injured, you're not getting hurt, etc. Cardio does take time as well, and then there's also the whole debate between whether or not you should be doing HIIT or low intensity in order to maximize weight loss. That's for another time. We're not going to talk about that for now. But I hope that answers this question. And there's still a lot more to it, but this is a very simple way to gauge whether or not you should be training close to failure. But the summary here and the conclusion is, if your goal is to maximize the amount of muscle you want to build right now, yes, you should be training pretty much close to failure, if not to failure, for most of your sets, given that you're able to recover from it. Number 2, if you're someone trying to build strength and maximize 1 rep max strength, you probably should not be training close to failure, but you shouldn't be far off either. If your goal is to lose weight, I would say don't train close to failure and simply try and maximize the amount of cardio you can do and just maintain your muscle mass. So do just enough weight training, use the minimum effective dose required to maintain the amount of muscle you currently have whilst doing enough cardio. And that pretty much covers why most people go to the gym. I mean, these usually are the 3 reasons. It's very rare that I hear about any other reason. So yeah, hope that answers your question, Paulers, and thanks for asking. I'll catch you all soon. Peace.